Welcome, welcome, welcome to the MasterMind Library. I am. They call me Ferdinand, the bringer of balance, leader of many disciplines, and your host of the MasterMind Library, home of the MasterMind Book Club. All right, so that's what I was doing wrong in the last episode. I had the volume button on Instagram. So I think I fixed that this time around. So thank everybody for being here. And we are in MHotep, the Vizier and physician of King Zoser. This is some good material to be learning about. And I would definitely say that at any point in history, Imhotep is a really good individual to be learning about. One of the ancient ancestors who did some very amazing things in ancient Kemet. And we need to make sure that we keep his name alive. And it needs to be coming from, as much as possible, from the direct descendants of the ancient people. So we've got a book here from a Caucasian author who has done a lot of research, and it's got a lot of good information on Imhotep. So let's dive into chapter 4, which is Imhotep as God of Medicine. All right, let's go ahead and move in our book to that section. Let's see. Let's look at our table of contents. All right, 38. There we go. Okay, the apotheosis of Imhotep as God of medicine. All right, we're about to go ahead and dive on in, hit it hard. All right, let's make it a little bigger on our screen. That way everybody can see it. Oops, not the science of mind. Imhotep, the vizier and physician of King Zoser. Apologize for that, y'all. The apotheosis of Imhotep as God of medicine. The full apotheosis of Imhotep appears to have taken place in the Persian period, somewhere around 525 BC, the year in which Egypt was conquered by Cambyses and became a Persian province. To this new Egyptian god is now assigned a divine father, Ptah, in place of his human father, Canifer, and he becomes a member of the great triad of Memphis, which includes Ptah, Sekhmet, and Imhotep, his mother, Credonk, and his. And there goes some more artwork here. Imhotep, the Metu Neter. For all who are not familiar, that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at the Metu Neter of the ancient people of Kemet. This is what the language is called. All right. Wife, Nofret, are in their turn raised to the rank of the mother and the wife of a god. The Greco-Egyptians called Imhotep Immalthes or Asclepios, and gradually assimilated him with their own deity of medicine. The Imhotepian cult was probably at first associated with his tomb, which, as already mentioned, was situated outside the city of Memphis, on the edge of the desert to the west of Memphis. As time went on, his cult spread far and wide through the land of Egypt and even into Nubia. More and more generally was Imhotep accepted as the deity of medicine and worshipped throughout the land, as on a level with the full gods of Egypt. A similar process of gradual elevation to the rank of demigod and finally of full deity occurred in the case of another noted sage, Vizier Amenophis, the son of Hapi, and vizier to King Amenophis III. The names of these two sages had lingered for many centuries in the popular imagination as national heroes who had, in course of time, come to be regarded as superhuman in nature and therefore entitled to divine honors. Probably in both cases, their burial places became centers of pilgrimage. And, at any rate, in the case of Imhotep, especially for the sick and suffering, the Amenophis was in many respects the counterpart of Imhotep. What the latter was at the outset for Memphis, Amenophis was for the Thebans down to the latest times. His deification probably took place in the reign of King Ptolemy Euergetes II. At least 3 temples are known to have been built in honor of Imhotep. The first one was at Memphis and became a famous hospital and school of magic and medicine. Doubtless countless numbers of sick, maimed, and blind persons resorted to that shrine and returned to their simple mud hovels, nestling under the date palms or amongst the millet fields, full of gratitude for renewed health and strength. This beloved priest physician was eventually laid to rest near to the temple where he had spent his days in relieving pain and prolonging life. For him, we cannot doubt that Sidar Dolorum Divinum Opus. This temple was called by the Greeks the Asclepion, and was situated close to the Serapeon. In fact, the worship of Imhotep was to some extent connected with that of Serapis, so much that there were stone altars sacred to him in the Serapeon itself, on which daily libations were offered. Another temple of Imhotep existed at Philae. Of this, a glorious specimen of Egyptian architecture, a large portion has survived to this day, in spite of its immersion in a vast reservoir. Some of the halls, which were used for clinical purposes thousands of years ago, are extant. Maybe they mean extinct. Extant. Maybe it is extant. I gotta up my word game. All right, let's move to this next page. It gets a little wonky when we get to, and we have a map here of the island of Philae. This temple was built under the Ptolemies, the hieroglyphic inscriptions being those of Ptolemy IV Philopator, while the Greek text over the door, dedicating the building to the Greek god Asclepios, was placed there by the command of Ptolemy V Epiphanes. From one of the former, we obtain the following address to Imhotep. Great One, son of Ptah, the creative God, made by Thenin, begotten by him and beloved by him, the God of divine forms in the temples, who giveth life to all men, the mighty one of wonders, the maker of times, who cometh unto him that calleth upon him, wheresoever he may be, who giveth sons to the childless, the chief Cherubeb or Cariheb, the image and likeness of Thoth, the wise. The best guide to the temple of Imhotep is the long east colonnade leading from the temple of, here goes the ground plan of the temple of Imhotep Philae. We're going to take a quick look at that. Keep it moving. It's nice. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. They've got a compass up here. All right. Temple of Ars Nufis, to the great pylon, a colonnade consisting of 17 columns. Through this wall are cut 7 doorways, the first 5 of which lead out to the court in which stands the ruined chapel of Mandulis. The sixth leads to the small temple of Imhotep. As the visitor passes through this doorway, he finds himself in a little court, on the north side of which is the entrance to the temple. There are figures of Imhotep and other deities on both sides of the entrance, which Wegal thus describes. On the left side is seen King Ptolemy V, Epiphanes, before Imhotep. On the right side, he is shown before Khnum, Satis, and Anukis, and before Unefer, Isis, and Imhotep. Around the doorway are small panels of reliefs showing Osiris, Isis, Khnum, Hathor, Ptah, Thoth, and Imhotep being adored by the king. On either side of the jambs of the door, the king's titles are inscribed and references made to Isis, while he is said to be beloved of Imhotep and Ptah. Do me a favor and take care. Stop the ringing. There was also a small temple at Thebes, but it appears to be less important than that of Philae. In Thebes, as already mentioned, Ptah, Mut, Hathor, and Imhotep in later times formed, and here goes the temple of Imhotep, island of Philae. Oh yeah, the Metu Neter is all over it. Here goes ruins of the temple of Imhotep. On the island of Philae. A triad, which thus differs from the Memphitic triad referred to above, in which Sekhmet formed the third member. Apart from the temples of Imhotep, we have records of a sanatorium which was situated in the upper terrace of the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el Bahari, and which was given up to the worship of Imhotep and of the other deified hero, Amenophis, the son of Hapi, both of whom figured at this period as patrons of healing. Under their auspices, Deir el Bahari seems to have become a regular resort for invalids who scratched or painted numerous invocations to these deities on the walls of the temple. Amongst common graffiti are the following: the homage of M to the Lord God Asclepios. N came to worship the great god Asclepios, usually with the addition of the name Amenethus, and often with that of Hygeia to Asclepios. Sometimes the writer associated his wife, his family, or his friends in his act of worship. A graffito quoted by Milne is of special interest, as it has been twice improved upon by later commentators. The first entry ran Eugraphios offers his homage before the Lord God Asclepios and Amenophis and Hygeia. Be mindful of us and grant us healing. At the end of this, one Pesibus, presumably a Gnostic who desired some credit to be ascribed to the weird spirits whom he worshipped, wrote, with the help of Cherstapani and Freetab. Finally, a Christian, grieved to find so many deities evoked, added his correction above the errors of previous centuries. It is the one God who helps you. An interesting story has survived which illustrates the practice of incubation at Imhotep's temples. We shall follow here the popular version as amended by Maspero, while readers wishing for a more exact translation are referred to F. L. Griffith's transliteration. The story relates to a man named Satmi Kamuas, the son of the pharaoh Usermares, who had no man-child by his wife Mahit Tuxhit. This afflicted him greatly in his heart, and his wife, and his wife Mahitua Skit was greatly afflicted with him. One day, when he was more depressed than usual, his wife Mahitua Skit went to the temple of Imhotep, son of Ptah, and prayed before him, saying, "Turn thy face towards me, my lord Imhotep, son of Ptah. It is thou who dost work miracles, and who art beneficent in all thy deeds. It is thou who givest a son to her who has none. Listen to my lamentation and give me conception of a man-child." Mahitua Skit, the wife of Satmi, slept in the temple, and she dreamed a dream that same night. One spake with her, saying, "Art thou not Mahitua Skit, the wife of Satmi, who dost sleep in the temple to receive a remedy for thy sterility from the hands of the god? When tomorrow morning comes, go to the bathroom of Satmi, thy husband, and thou wilt find a root of colocasia that is growing there. The colocasia that thou meetest with thou shalt gather with its leaves. Thou shalt make of it a remedy that thou shalt give to thy husband. Then thou shalt lie by his side, and thou shalt conceive by him the same night." When Mahitua Skit awoke from her dream, after having seen these things, she did everything according to that which had been told her in her dream. And then she lay by the side of Satmi, her husband, and she conceived by him. When the time came, she had the signs of pregnant woman, and Satmi announced it to Pharaoh, for his heart rejoiced greatly thereat. He bound an amulet upon her and recited a spell over her. Eventually, she gave birth to a remarkable boy named Senosiris, who later on performed many wonders in the land of Egypt. A similar story of sterility being cured by Imhotep is told in a famous stele of the Ptolemaic period, now in the British Museum. The story relates to a lady named Thet Imhotep, who belonged to a family that reckoned among its members several princes of Memphis and high priests of Ptah. She was born in the 9th year of the reign of Ptolemy the 13th, about 71 BC. And when 14 years old, she was married to her half-brother, the priest Pi-Sheri in Ptah. During the first 12 years of her married life, she gave birth to 3 daughters, but had no son, which caused her husband great grief. She and her husband prayed to the god Imhotep, the son of Ptah, for a son. In response, the god, appearing to Pi-Sheri in Ptah in a dream, promised to grant his prayer provided that he carried out certain works in connection with the temple. When the priest awoke, he caused the works to be taken in hand, and soon after they were completed, his wife gave birth to a son who was named Imhotep and surnamed Pedi Bast. Incubation sleep in the temples was resorted to for many forms of sickness, suggestive intimations being given by the deity during natural or drug-produced dreams and interpreted by the priests. Doubtless, in many cases, a cure was effected through the awakening of an expectation of cure in the sleeper himself. Thus, the temple sleep was used as a form of faith healing. Suggestions received during dreams that a cure had been effected were found to have achieved their purpose when the sufferer awoke. The more emotional and highly strung the patient, the greater the probability of a cure. As the centuries rolled by, the worship of Imhotep spread more and more widely. until eventually he became recognized all over Egypt as the god of medicine. Indeed, the learned magician physician of the time of King Zoser became one of the most popular deities, as we learn from the eulogistic appreciations that have been handed down to us. Thus, he is described as the good physician of gods and men, a kind and merciful God, assuaging the sufferings of those in pain, healing the diseases of men, and giving peaceful sleep to the restless and suffering. Elsewhere, he is spoken of as the God who protects human beings, who gives to him who calls upon him, who gives life to men and women, who gives life to all who are bounden to him. And at other times, he is described as the God who looks after the sick, and the worshipful or holy God who gives a son to him who has none. Another fine testimony says that he visits the suffering, to give them peaceful sleep and heal their pains and diseases. The popularity of ImHotep will cause no surprise, since he both healed the sick, protected from accident, and gave children to those who had hitherto been sterile. As breasted as has well said, the great wise man ImHotep was one of King Zoser's chief advisors in priestly wisdom, in magic, in the formulation of wise proverbs, in medicine, in architecture. This remarkable figure of Zoser's reign left so notable a reputation that his name was never forgotten. The people sang of his proverbs centuries later, and 2,500 years after his death, he had become a god of medicine, whom the Greeks, who called him Imhotep, identified with their own as Asclepius. In fact, during the Hellenistic period, the sage Imhotep, now deified, appears to have become the principal god worshipped at Memphis, and to have well nigh superseded Ptah. But apart from the temples specially associated with him, Imhotep was also worshipped in various other temples. Amongst them is the temple of Der el Bahari, where the Ptolemaic chamber was dedicated to two men who had both been deified, Imhotep, the son of Ptah, and Amenophis, the son of Hapi. On the wall of this chamber is a fine representation of the deity Imhotep, carrying a scepter in his right hand and an ankh in his left. Close to the god is the inscription, I have given thee life combined with health and protection. I am thy protector. Other inscriptions describe Imhotep as the great Kariheb, the first chief, one of the Ibis, Imhotep, the son of Ptah, son of his wall, who listens to him, who implores him, on the western side of Thebes, who does good to its inhabitants, giving life, strength and joy to its dwellers, and enriching the land. Behind the picture of Imhotep is a goddess having some resemblance to Hathor. Neville suggests that this figure is the mother of Imhotep, who has also been deified, and says, I give thee life. I join to it health. My protective power, Imhotep, is guarding thee. Another shrine in which Imhotep was worshipped was the Temple of Ptah at Thebes. This temple was built by Thothmosis III and restored by several of the Ptolemies. Here were worshipped Ptah, his wife Sekhmet, and their son Imhotep, together with Amenophis, the son of Hapi. Another small Ptolemaic temple, known at the present day as the Vizier el Aguz, Khazir el Aguz, was erected by Euergetes II to the god Thoth. In the second hall may be seen the king sacrificing to Thoth, Imhotep, and the deified sage Amenophis. This temple stands southwest of the Colossi of Memnon. Yet another temple in which Imhotep and Amenophis were jointly worshipped was Medinet Habu, lying directly west of the Colossi. Evidently, the two famous sages of Egypt, who had both been accorded divine honors, were often worshipped in the same shrines. The same applies to the temple of Deir el Medina, which lies northwest of the Colossi. This temple was originally the grave of Amenophis and was converted by Ptolemy IV into a shrine to the gods of the dead. In it, both he and Imhotep were worshipped in company with the full gods of Egypt. Apart from these public temples, there appear to have been in Ptolemaic times many small shrines or altars which individuals erected in their own homes in honor of their tutelary deity Imhotep and in the hope of securing his protection against all sorts of misfortunes. In other cases, such shrines were hired out by their owners in return for money payments contributed by sick persons or such as needed some oracular guidance in a difficulty. Such shrines were dedicated both to Isis and Asclepios, Semhotep, the latter, however, being the principal god of healing. The interesting discovery has recently been made that under the Ptolemies, regular festivals were celebrated in honor of the god Imhotep in much the same way as was done in the case of other traditional deities. It is well known that festivals and fasts played a leading part in the religious life of the Egyptians and were celebrated with vociferous demonstrations of joy, processions accompanied by banners, singing, dancing, and sacred emblems. Pilgrimages and banquets also formed part of the festival, which might extend over several days or even weeks. Doubtless, in the case of Imhotep, there would be abundant expressions of gratitude by his former patients for the wonderful cures he had performed. This discovery has been made by means of an inscription on the recently found carved pedestal of a lost statue, now in the British Museum. The inscription begins with an address to his Lord Imhotep, son of Ptah, from his divine friend, the prophet and scribe Petibast. I am thy son, perfect in thy service of thy Ka on all thy festival days, at the commencement of the seasons and on all festivals taken together. There were 6 festivals in all, celebrated on the following dates. Day of festival, 16th day, 3rd month of spring, Egyptian month. Epiphi, date 31st day. 11th day, 2nd month of winter. Mekhir, December 27th. 9th day, 4th month of spring. 9th day, 4th month of spring. Mesore, June 23rd. 17th day, 4th month of Shemu. Mesore, July 1st. 23rd day, 4th month of Shemu. Mesore, July 7th. 4th day, 2nd month of Shemu. Peoni, 19th of April. It will be observed these festivals are not arranged in the chronological order of the months of the year. Their order corresponds to certain events in the life of the god Imhotep, which they are intended to commemorate. A. First festival, the day on which was born Imhotep of his father Ptah and his mother Creonte. The heart of the great god, the father of the gods, is pleased at seeing him. B. Second festival, the day of the first festival of Imhotep. He appears before his father Ptah and Sekhmet, the great one, beloved of Ptah. He ordains and glorifies his image. C. Third festival, the day of the slaying of the vile Asiatics by Sekhmet, the great one, beloved of Ptah. She tears off their limbs whilst burning them. She capsizes their boats in the region of the land of the Red Lake. D. Fourth festival, the day of lamentation of his father Ptah for Imhotep when he died, his body. And I would imagine the question mark there is transitioned. His body, his spirit when it was reunited. Probably an allusion to the separation of spirit and body at the moment of the death of the god. E. Fifth festival, the day on which Imhotep reposes before his father after his death. He enters and goes out before the great god. The reunion of his spirit with his body takes place, and he rests in the great Dihan, a cavern dear to his heart. F. Sixth festival, the day on which the spirit of Imhotep departs towards the great place of sojourn of this god upon the whole earth. No doubt at these festivals, the Imhotepian devotees would bring their offerings to the sanctuary, some of them being given as thank offerings for recovery from illness or accident, others in anticipation of such benefits in future years. Some interesting details have survived of the allowances made to the priests who were associated with the Egyptian temples during the 2nd century BC. These allowances, known as the, it looks like it's in Greek. It looks like it says overages, autikai, appear to have consisted of wine, milk, oil, and bread. The two forms of oil were sesame and kiki, i.e. castor oil, while the loaves were made of spelt, i.e. form of wheat, triticum spelta. As the Asclepion at Memphis, in addition to the ordinary priests, a form of lower priesthood seems to have been in existence, represented by the so-called twin sisters. These twin sisters received daily for their services at the Asclepion 4 loaves a day, called celestis. On what grounds did Imhotep receive the very rare honor of being raised to the full rank of divinity? Only a few other instances in which an ordinary mortal received apotheosis are known in the whole of Egyptian history. During his life, King Zoser bestowed on him the highest office in the state, that of Vizier, but posterity conferred an even greater honor when it placed him among the deities of Egypt. Maspero attributes this signal favor to the cumulative qualifications of architect, physician, sage, and magician, but attributes the apotheosis mainly to his skill in magic. It is, he says, in virtue of his powers as a magician that Imhotep was deified. There can be no question that in Egypt, magic exerted an enormous influence in the life both of the individual and of the nation. It was invoked in all questions of life and death, of love and hatred, of health and sickness. But this potent influence does not prevent the reputation of Imhotep being also due to exceptional skill in the use of the rich materia medica at his disposal, for it must have been chiefly in pseudo-neurosis that magic was successful. Physical as well as psychical therapeutics may have been used in cooperation, and by combining their forces have raised him to a position of rare eminence. Doubtless, after his death, his reputation led to pilgrimages to his tomb, when incubation sleep in his adjoining temple was followed by many recoveries. Every successful cure would confirm the public confidence that the former magician-physician still possessed superhuman powers. Fame would grow into veneration and eventually into true worship. The deification of Imhotep proves that the Egyptians believed it possible for gods to be evolved out of common mortals. Speaking generally, an ordinary individual was not supposed to have any right to immortality, but the part of him which persists and which is called his ka or double might be kept alive, provided it was unceasingly nourished and comforted by actual bread, meat, and drink, and other necessary supplies. When the ka of a deceased was thus supported by his descendants or by devotees, the moment of his dissolution could be indefinitely postponed. Even the gods, although less perishable than mortals, were subject to like infirmities, as were the latter, e.g., to disease, senility, 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 and death, and needed liturgies and incantations, as well as material sustenance, if their continued existence was to be assured. Thus, the difference between a deity and an ordinary mortal was merely one of degree, provided therefore that the descendants of a deceased person continue to support him by generous gifts and endowments in the same manner as was done in the case of a god. His continued existence would be assured. In Maspero's words, mortal men would have manufactured a new immortal. The generous gifts provided by his devotees would at the same time enhance his prestige. This prestige would bring further gifts and thus increase his chances of attaining immortality. Such seems to have been the sequence of events which led to the apotheosis of one who had originally been an ordinary man of flesh and blood. Long before the Greek conquest of Egypt by Alexander, Imhotep had become generally recognized as the deity of medicine. The Greeks, who called him Imhotep, amalgamated him with their own Asclepios, Asculapius, so that for some centuries the Egyptian deity of medicine may be described as in some measure a fusion of the ancient Imhotep and the much more modern Asclepios. Frequently, indeed, the identity of Imhotep is concealed under the name Asclepios. During the Ptolemaic period, there seems to have been some relation between the worship of Imhotep and that of the sacred bull of Ptah named Apis. Ammianus Marcellinus, referring to the time of Julius Augustus, 63 BC to AD 14, thus describes the association of Apis with the temple of Imhotep at Memphis. When the Apis bull had died, another is sought amid great public mourning, and if one can be found distinguished by all the required marks, he is led to Memphis, a city of great renown, and especially celebrated for the patronage of the god Asculapius. And after he has been led into the city by 100 priests and conducted into a chamber, he is looked upon as consecrated and is said to point out by evident means the signs of future events. Some also of those who come to him he repels by unfavorable signs. As it is reported, he formerly rejected Caesar Germanicus when he offered him food, thus portending what shortly happened. Doubtless, Apis was taken into the inner sanctum of Asclepios, SC Imhotep, in order that he might be touched and thus consecrated by the statue of the deity. An interesting question arises as to how late the worship of Imhotep lasted on during the Christian era. The paleography of the graffiti at the sanatorium at Deir el-Bahari, which relate to Imhotep, indicates that they probably belong to the 2nd century AD, but not much beyond it. There was, however, a special local reason for their discountenance. The raids of the barbarian tribes of Nubia in the middle of the 3rd century would doubtless interfere with security of life, frighten away invalids, and check pilgrimages to the shrine. Probably, therefore, Deir el-Bahari ceased to be a health resort for the Greeks and Romans soon after AD 200. In the north of Egypt, on the other hand, there is evidence that the worship of Imhotep continued considerably later, and indeed that his reputation as the deity of medicine gradually grew in comparison with that of the other Egyptian gods, until in the 4th century he had come to be regarded as the leading divinity of Memphis. As Otto says, it is very remarkable that the deified Imhotep, who was probably not acknowledged as a god until the Saite period, and did not receive his fullest recognition as god till the Ptolemaic period, by the time of Aminianus Marcellinus, had come to be the chief deity of Memphis. Thus, his worship evidently extended well into the Roman period, to the time when profound changes had taken place in the internal and external economy of Egypt. The country, in fact, had become part of a new world. Her glorious history, one of the most momentous epochs in the history of man, had closed, and she was living an artificial life in which she no longer played an active part. The collapse of ancient Egyptian civilization was due to a variety of causes acting cumulatively. One of these causes was the passing of the country under the guardianship of Rome in the year 30 BC. Henceforth, she became a vassal of the Roman Empire and was governed by its representative. The steady drain involved by the annual tribute of corn to feed the hungry Romans, combined with the extortions of her governors, depleted the supply of capital wealth. The bucolic rebellion of AD 172 was a symptom of the national distress and aggravated the exhaustion of the country. From this period down to about AD 300, the land became more and more impoverished. Another potent influence at work in the disintegration of the ancient regime was the spread of Christianity, whose doctrines were well established in Alexandria in the 2nd century and were gradually being diffused throughout the country. In spite of persecutions, the number of churches steadily grew, so that by about AD 300, many towns on the Nile were provided with places of Christian worship. The conversion of the Emperor Constantine, CAAD 288 to 337. The conversion of the Emperor Constantine to Christianity gave a further impetus to the new religion and caused many worshippers of the gods of Egypt to transfer their devotion to an austere form of Christianity. Indeed, during the next 2 centuries, these converts did their best to root out the native forms of worship. Meanwhile, the national faith in the ancient deities had weakened almost to a vanishing point, and with that weakening, the associated priesthood and ritual would naturally disappear. Associated with the progress of Christianity was the growth of Christian monasticism, which, while it had sprung from Egyptian monasticism, had in course of time become an important adjunct to the new religion. These monasteries indeed frequently occupied buildings that had previously been Egyptian temples and naturally brought all native religious observances to an end. So numerous had the monks become that in the 4th century, the Emperor Valens, AD 364 to 378, sent 3,000 troops into the desert of Nitria to compel the able-bodied Asiatics who had retired there to enlist in the imperial armies. In that desert alone, there lived no less than 5,000 monks. Further, a large amount of labor was withdrawn by the monasteries from the economic resources of the country and devoted to ecclesiastical purposes, thus deprived of an important productive element in its population and drained of many of its material resources. The nation sank to a low economic level, so low indeed that the available capital was insufficient to support the miserable, debased coinage. By AD 370, taxes were paid in kind and commerce was reduced to barter. A third factor in the general disruption was the introduction of Greek culture and science, including Greek medicine. Ever since the founding of Alexandria in 331 BC, Hellenic influences had gradually been permeating and undermining the ancient methods of treating the sick, based partly on evidence and partly on magic, that had held sway for many centuries. The Egyptian physicians had been content to use prescriptions that had been handed down for many generations, rarely testing their results by means of experiment, while, on the other hand, the patient was still encouraged in the old belief that the magic formulas which were recited whenever a potion was swallowed were able to placate the evil spirits that had caused the disease and were at least as potent as the physical remedy. This antiquated procedure now gave way under the influence of a spirit of inquiry and experiment, rapid progress being made in anatomy, physiology, materia medica, and pathology. The result was that the primitive system of medicine, which had been in vogue since the days of Imhotep, passed into oblivion, the old order changing and giving place to new. Lastly, amongst the forces which brought the ancient civilization of Egypt to an end were the hostile incursions of Egypt during the Roman period. Both the Blemmyes of the eastern desert and the Nobodai of the western desert harassed the Roman conquerors at intervals during the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, and the emperor Diocletian, 284 to 305, was obliged to put an end to their invasions by an annual subsidy. The story of the political and religious disturbances that raged during these early centuries of our era is too long and complex to be told here. Suffice it to say that they combined to render the foreign occupation a period of stress and turmoil in which the constituent elements of early Egyptian civilization broke asunder. Indeed, the final collapse of Egypt was largely due to the purely military government of the Romans, who did little to prevent the inroads of savages and allowed the country to lapse into barbarianism. The Egyptian people had lost all desire for independence and did nothing to resist the oppressive alien government. Thus, the Muslim conquest of the country in AD 639 became easy. And for over 3 centuries, Egypt became a province of the Eastern Caliphate. The worship of Imhotep at Memphis seems to have lingered on until the process of national dissolution was far advanced. Doubtless, the traditions of his skill in the Ars Medindi, dating from the glorious days of the early dynasties, kept alive the popular confidence in him, even when faith in many of the other deities had faded away. All through his long career since the days of the pharaoh Zoser, he played a worthy part on the stage of history. Forever will his name be held in grateful remembrance. To Imhotep, indeed, may truthfully be applied the words of Virgil, written not many years before the Roman conquest of his country. Semper honis nominque tum laudesquet manubant. And that concludes chapter 4. Powerful material there. Some stuff I'm definitely going to dive into. I think the part I'm definitely going to dive into is the Blemmies, and I'm pretty sure I'm not even saying their names right, and the Nobodai. As if you was that much of a problem to the Romans that that the emperor Diocletian felt the need to pay you to stop attacking them. I want to understand more about these guys, and I want to understand a lot more about how they were living in the desert, because these are desert ancestors that we're talking about. what was needed for life out there in that environment, what was needed to stay safe, because there's animals in that environment that are hungry. So there's not much protection out there outside of whatever weapons that you make. So this is some powerful information here. I highly recommend that everybody who, anybody out here who wants to, get a better understanding of MHotep, this is a good book to read. And there's many others out here that we can read to get that understanding that we need. Because I think that if we want to get an understanding of physicians in today's world, we've got to get an understanding of MHotep. If we want to get an understanding of Hippocrates, Ptolemy, and so many of the other Greeks who are renowned in the world, who are looked at as great in this world for the work that they did many years ago, we got to understand MHotep. He is the beginning of each one of them. Now, what I also want to say is there's some very good information in this book. I want to make sure I make that very clear. There's some very good information in this book. But I do believe that our father of healing, of what we know, of what we have as available records, is Thoth, Cehuti, however you'd like to say his name. Some people may call him Hermes Trismegistus, but he predates MHotep. He predates MHotep by a very, very long time. And the things that he did, according to what I've read, is massive. We need to be recognizing him as the father of really dang near everything in this post Younger Dryas time frame, post deluge. So yeah, that is chapter 4 of MHotep, the Vizier and physician of King Zoser. And we'll be coming back next episode with chapter 5. So I look forward to everybody being here with us and growing with us and going along with us. Yep. So expose your gift.